What's up? I'm Coach Dan Blewett. I'm a former pro pitcher. In today's video, I'm going to give you everything I know about pitch counts for youth pitchers. Pitch counts are super important for helping to reduce injury potential, but there's a lot more to this discussion than just going through the charts and saying, okay, 40 pitches, 1 day of rest, 60 pitches, 3 days of rest, etc., etc. Pitching can be complicated, managing your pitching staff no matter what level you're at. So in today's video, we'll talk through everything pitch counts. There are high stress innings and there are low stress innings. And as a coach, if your player has very stressful innings, you need to factor that into account. So say a pitcher goes 5 innings, 65 pitches, and he's, give him a 1 or 2 runs, and overall he's cruising, right? 12 pitches an inning, 15 pitches an inning, 10 pitches an inning, just kind of moving along, mowing through the other team. That's very different than 65 pitches where maybe the pitcher only goes 3 innings and it's 2 runners on base every inning, a couple walks, a double, and they're pitching through second and third, bases loaded consistently. Those are stressful innings that take a lot more out of you physically and mentally. That's not going to show up in just the pitch count tally. So as a coach, I would say 2 pitchers both throw 60 pitches. One has a very low stress 60, another has another high stress 60, and their pitch counts, say your leash is 80 for the day. I might yank my pitcher after the high stress 60 and let my other pitcher go through the low stress 80, just because they might end up being kind of equivalent. Because again, a pitch is not a pitch. The stress and the context of the innings that they're pitching, they definitely matter. So if your pitcher has a very stressful outing, and even if they're not at their pitch count limit, maybe cut them a little bit short that day because it just took more out of them mentally, emotionally, and physically. Never let a kid throw more than 40 pitches in an inning. And really, when they get in the 30s, you really need to think about pulling them. I've had this situation happen where my starter is typically pretty reliable, but they start the game off with 2 5-pitch walks, and then the third hitter, battle, 8 pitches later, they walk them as well. When my pitchers get to the 20 pitch mark in an inning and they have not gotten an out, I start to get the next reliever ready, because it could be a long at bat and a single, a long at bat and an out, and then a long at bat and another walk. And now suddenly we're quickly at 32 pitches, and that is a lot of stress. Those are very long innings. And so, yes, your pitcher might be cleared to throw 80 pitches today. And you might say, well, even if they have a 40 or 50 pitch first inning, they could still have, 3 quick 10 pitch innings after that. I don't let them do it. Anything above 30, you really need to think about yanking your pitcher because, again, they're not getting the typical rest interval that they usually would. A typical inning's 15 pitches. So now they're out there for twice as long and they're in a very high stress physical and emotional situation, and that's not good. So really, my cutoff is 40, and I'm really thinking about pulling my pitcher at 30, especially if they're really, really struggling. Sometimes big innings just happen and the pitcher's still throwing strikes. Those are rare, but if a pitcher is imploding with their control and they're already crossing over 20 pitches and they haven't gotten an out, you really need to get a reliever ready, and it's in that pitcher's best interest to be yanked somewhere in the 30s of their pitch count for that inning. My next pitch count tip for young pitchers is follow the ASMI Pitch Smart guidelines. I will link below to the ASMI website. This set of guidelines was created by some of the world's smartest minds in baseball. PTs, pitching coaches, orthopedic surgeons like Dr. James Andrews, they all weighed in and said what is best for pitchers, not only in the United States, but all over the world. So they released these guidelines, and even if your town has a set of guidelines, I would cross-reference them with the ASMI Pitch Smart guidelines, because again, these are the best baseball minds who deeply care about reducing injuries, and it's their best effort to say, hey, this is what you should be following if you're a youth coach. So please check out the ASMI Pitch Count guidelines, which I'll link to in the description below. If pitchers are returning from a significant amount of time off, whether it's an injury, or maybe they just missed 2 weekends, or maybe they just haven't gotten in a game for quite a while, and they haven't been able to keep their pitch count up, you need to knock their pitch count back down. In college baseball, this is the first time where pitchers really have a long, structured program from their school. Lots of players have this from their, maybe travel academy in the winter, but especially in college, you learn that it takes a couple months to build up to be ready to hit the ground running and be a starting pitcher and have 60, 70, 80 pitches of high quality. For youth pitchers, they don't usually get this buildup. Often they're playing other sports in the winter. Often they just aren't with their team consistently enough where they can get their 2 or 3 bullpens a week to really build their pitch count up and their stamina. And so what happens is a lot of youth pitchers, they jump out there and they go, okay, well, coach says I got to throw my starters 80 pitches right out the gate. That's not okay. They need to build up to that 60, 70, 80 pitch threshold or above if they're older. But if they have a really big time off, again, say they missed 2 weeks, then they're sick a week, now it's been a month since they've pitched, their pitch count for that individual pitcher needs to get knocked down to no more than 40. And then they're going to have to build up through being in games consistently again. They're going to have to go through it as a starter, as a reliever, even if they were a starter. This happened to me one year in Pro Bowl. I was a starter. I had a really slight forearm injury that sat me down for 4 weeks. And then I was out of the starting rotation for the rest of the year because it was so hard to build me back up in the middle of the season. If your pitcher is pitching and there's a rain delay or a lightning delay or anything more than, say, 25 minutes, it probably needs to be the end of that pitcher's night. Now, there can be exceptions. If this is your starting pitcher and they've only thrown 20 pitches, sure, you might be able to get another, 40 out of them. But for most pitchers, if they've thrown at least 40 pitches in the game already and then they have this rain delay, you have to factor in they're going to have to completely re-warm up from scratch. They also have this enormous downtime that really sucks life out of your arm. And so basically, I would chop off essentially maybe 30 or 40 pitches off of their pitch count that you had allocated for them if they have a really big delay in the middle of a game. So say your pitcher can go 80 pitches today, your starter, and he's thrown 40, and after those 40, after say the second or third inning, there's a huge lightning delay, 45 minutes. I would say if they come back in, they only get 20 left. And then at that point, you have to ask yourself, is this really worth it? They're probably going to be much less sharp. They're going to be mentally a lot less sharp. It's a really tough thing to come back from if there's a really big delay. If it's only 15 or 20 minutes, that's still somewhat in the realm of a normal inning, right? You have a really big inning, they can be 15 minutes sometimes. But in general, if you have a big rain or lightning delay, you really need to think about bringing your next pitcher in and just calling it a day for the starting pitcher or whoever was already in the game. If you have a flamethrower on your team, say you're a 13U team, and you have a pitcher who throws exceptionally hard for his age, I would reduce that kid's pitch count just in general. Say every other starting pitcher on your team can go 80 pitches. For that young man or that young woman, I would say give her at least just 70 or 60. So why would you do this? I think the big thing here is to understand that when pitchers mature early and they have a really maybe a standard deviation or two more velocity than everyone else their age, they're going to get overused by pretty much every coach. And if you're a well-meaning coach and you have that really talented, hard-throwing pitcher now, I would err on the side of giving them less mileage, as little mileage as you can. This is kind of the same way major league teams sort of coddle their first round draft picks, second round draft picks when they get called up, right? Maybe they'll only give them a small workload their first summer because they pitched in the spring with their college team. This is the same kind of thing. If you're like, man, this kid's really talented, got such a good arm. I know that every other team, they're going to want to pitch him and pitch him and pitch him and pitch him. And that's how a lot of these hard throwing players get injured faster than lesser players. I think you as a coach could say, you know what, I'm just going to give them a little less mileage because also there's more velocity flowing and more force flowing through their arm in general. So as a good practice as a coach, really consider giving your hardest throwing players a little shorter leash on their pitch count compared to other players. My next pitch count consideration is not a specific number, but it's rather for pitchers and catchers. We know that catchers that also pitch are at significantly higher risk for arm injuries than players that play a different position and also pitch. When you catch, you make so many throws back to your pitcher during a game, like hundreds. Obviously, a single throw back for every pitch that the pitcher is going to throw to you, plus these hard throws down between innings, throws to bases, catching base stealers, all that stuff. Catching is very stressful on the arm. One of my policies as a former travel academy owner is if we had a catcher who also pitched, and this is often the case because they're, especially at young levels, the kid who's catching often has a very good arm because he's the only one capable of catching base stealers, right? When we had a catcher who also wanted to continue to pitch, we relegated them to being only a reliever. They could not start for us. So that was policy number one for our catchers who also pitched. But the other thing is, when you're only a reliever, you're only going to go maybe 40 pitches on a typical day, 40 or 50. So we're not using them as our long reliever. We're using them as like a 2-inning reliever, pretty much tops. And the other policy we had for our catchers was they're not going to pitch and catch on the same day ever. So if they start on Friday and they're catching behind the plate and we have a doubleheader Friday, they're going to sit the second game and then maybe they can pitch the next day. But we always tried to give a full day if we could in between. So maybe our catcher would catch on Thursday, DH for us on Friday, and then they'd be in relief to pitch on Saturday. Sometimes that's not possible when you only have maybe 2 catchers and they have to split duties and it just doesn't work out that way. I know a lot of teams sometimes only have 1 primary catcher. And in that case, you really just probably should not let that kid pitch in general. But again, it's really important that if you have catchers that also pitch, it's really not a safe situation if they're a starting pitcher or if they do, they've got to go way farther apart. So maybe if you have a catcher that also pitches and they catch on Wednesday, sure, they could start a game maybe on Saturday or Sunday. That's totally fine. But again, on a weekend tournament format, it becomes really hard when they're catching games and putting so many throws on their arm that it's best just to relegate them to being a reliever. My next tip for pitch counts for youth pitchers, and this should seem like just obvious common sense, is reduce pitch counts early in the season and reduce pitch counts if it's cold outside. And often those two things coincide. Here in the mid-Atlantic where I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in Maryland. It's very cold in February, March, where the college season will play, and March, April, when the high school season will play. Those games can be 40 degrees sometimes. Reduce pitch counts, because pitchers are not stretched out yet at the beginning of the season. That's obvious thing number one. But number two, it's also colder, so it's harder for their joints to retain the warmth that we want that helps protect our body. So make sure as a coach, you're not just going down the ASMI pitch count guidelines and saying, okay, they can throw 80 pitches, no big deal, way to go. We're going to start here on March 1st. Taper it down, cut 20 or 30 pitches off everyone's pitch count, at least if they're a longer, starter or a long reliever. Cut them down early where they're starting the season. Hey, starters have a 60 pitch leash and relievers, 30 to 40 tops. And we're not going to have any long relievers who are also going 60, only starters, and then relievers are 30 to 40. That's a sensible way to start the season with regard to your pitch counts. All right, so I hope this video on pitch counts for youth pitchers was helpful. It can be very difficult to balance your pitching staff, especially at the beginning of the season, especially if you don't have a gigantic roster, and especially if you don't have a really big pitching staff. You want to have 10 pitchers if you can, but if you don't, you need to do the best with what you have. But that still means giving kids enough rest and not over pitching them. So please be cautious with your pitch counts. Please use some of these tips here and share this video with another friend, coach, or parent who needs to know what proper usage looks like for their young athlete. Thanks again. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't below. Check out my online pitching courses and books, which help support me making more free videos like these. And I'll see you here in the next video.